Hey everyone, welcome to another week of ProMAX Tech Talks. I'm Matt, coming to you from the living room laboratory, and as always, I'm joined by my tech team. This week, we're going to be talking about peer-to-peer networks and how you can use them for your remote video production team. But before we get started, make sure you hit that red button below to get the latest updates from ProMAX systems as soon as new content comes out. So guys, let's start this week off. Brian, what is a peer-to-peer network and how is it used?
So, probably the easiest way to talk about peer-to-peer networks is what most of us remember, like Napster and BitTorrent and that stuff, back when I was in college, that kind of stuff where you are, the original use for it was you're pulling little bits of every file from a million different people, and that kind of speeds up the transfer and allows you to source data from multiple peers. And then on the flip side of that, then share to multiple peers as well. Multiple peers can be pulling different parts of the same file from you at different times, things like that. So ultimately, it's a file transfer protocol at some level, or can be used as a file transfer protocol. That's the way we're kind of looking at it. But really, if you get into peer-to-peer networks, the idea is that there's no middleman. There's no controlling server. There's no cloud server to get between you, or no cloud service to get between you and the place where the data is going. It's just going straight there. And it might be going to 3 or 4 peers at the same time. And so it's a direct, very fast and very robust way to transfer data in our world.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Nathaniel, how could a video production team implement a peer-to-peer network in their environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've done this with our Media Hub servers. So as example, this little teeny tiny server, it never ceases to amaze me how small technology gets. That little server I have set up in a peer-to-peer network with Brian, with you, Matt, with probably most importantly for me and what I'm doing with our platform server back at the office. And then all of us in that work group that is our peer-to-peer network, right? And what's cool about that is just the speed at which we can transfer data back and forth and not thinking about it. Like we had one of our customers did a video testimonial for us the other day, and I threw that video testimonial on my little server that's here at my home. And then, 10 minutes later, I refreshed, looked at the server back at the office, and the data is there, which means it's also already pushing to you. It's also already pushing to Brian. So that's our implementation of it. And in a video environment, what we do for our customers, because, obviously performance is just absolutely paramount. We use those little boxes so that you can edit locally off of local SSD storage, while all the other transfer stuff is just happening in the background.
Awesome. So how does a peer-to-peer network compare to some of the other remote solutions that are out there?
One of the biggest things that I have a lot of conversations with people about is the fact that there's no kind of single center point, which is really, really important when you're talking about a group of people, because a critical nuance that most people aren't thinking about is that most home internet connections are actually better than business internet connections. And that's a whole nother topic, but fiber internet is pretty real, pretty common. I know Brian and myself both have gigabit up and down. At our office, we pay, I think our company, we pay 15 times the cost for our internet at our office than we do for the speed. Literally, it's nuts. So, one of the important things to understand is in this peer-to-peer network where you're talking to each other, you don't have to, be limited to the upload and download speed of wherever that one single point is, which is such a huge part of this.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathaniel. So, Brian, what do you need to set up a peer-to-peer network? Do you need special software, special hardware? What does that setup look like?
Yeah, it's mostly it depends how you want to execute it, right? At its base level, we're talking software and it's a protocol for communication. That's really what begins this process. But to do it right, you've got to have generally you've got to have something that's always on to really do this kind of correctly. I mean, you could do a peer-to-peer network and engage like a laptop or something, but that laptop's only going to transfer data and only have data transferred to it when it's on and awake. And how often is your laptop awake when you are not using it? Like, it's pretty rare. So when you do, flip it open and turn it on, it that's when it starts catching up with the rest of the peers. And that's not ideal. You want something that's kind of always on, catching up at any time. And then you can, connect your laptop to that, which is kind of the premise of that little server. You connect your laptop to that and it's just up to date, because it's basically waiting to communicate and talk with the rest of the group all the time. So there's nuance to it for sure. I mean, you can do it with just software, but to do it kind of in a productive way, there needs to be a little bit more thought and hardware to it, quite frankly.
One thing that I'm going to share out my screen here real quick, because I think this is such a great visual. Of course, it's from Wikipedia. We all love Wikipedia. But this gives me such a great visual of peer-to-peer network versus your kind of traditional server-based network, maybe a VPN, maybe honestly, even just cloud storage, where in a peer-to-peer network, in its most basic form, everyone can talk to each other. Everyone can share that data back and forth directly. Whereas in a server-based network, you've got that single point that everybody needs to go back to. And that's just a really basic visual on, kind of some of the differences here that we're talking about.
One of the real, I just want to hijack this for 1 second. Talk about one of the real benefits of this too is, one of the big things about residential internet is a lot of it's asynchronous. So you might have 200 megabit down and 20 megabit up. So if you're like if Nathaniel and I have 220 type internet connection, and I'm sending him data, and I'm sending Mike data, and I'm sending Matt data, or if you're pulling it from me, actually is probably the better way to look at it. If you're pulling data from the network, one of us, you can download it 200 megabytes or megabits a second, but one of us can only supply you 20. But in a peer-to-peer network, you have access to 3 peers with potentially the same data as that data migrates through the system. So now you've tripled your download speed over what would be, a 20 megabit download. And I'm using gross numbers here because you're never going to hit 20 megabit, at the top. But once you start kind of growing the network, and there are limiting factors here, there is kind of a diminishing return. But once you start adding, users to these groups, you can maintain pretty great speed. And then there's some logic around how files are distributed to keep that speed up at any given time. So even if data is kind of starts feeding out from one user at 20 megabytes a second, each user is kind of getting a different file, and then they kind of start collaborating. And there's a whole kind of logic to it that it's kind of a beautiful chaos in a way, right? But at the end, everything is faster. And all the data is now distributed. So from a backup perspective, the data at Matt's house is at my house, and the data at Mike's house is at Matt's house, and there's just inherent value in that as well.
There's like a visual that we should probably create that shows on the far side is the slowness of a VPN, and on the far opposite side is the speed of a peer-to-peer network. And it's right in the middle is the fastest you could ever get with a VPN is your internet connection. And the slowest you could ever get to in a peer-to-peer network is your internet connection. And a VPN scenario or server-based network, you're only going to go down from there. And a peer-to-peer, you're only going to go up from there.
Gotcha. So Brian, you touched on some limiting factors to a peer-to-peer network. Is there a limit on how many people can be on this kind of network, or are there other limitations that can impact it?
Yeah, well, in general, the limitations are about the software and kind of the command and control behind your network, right? Again, back to the Napster and the BitTorrent days, there were literally millions of users on those networks at any given time. Especially in their heyday. And that software was designed for that. That was kind of this anonymous peer-to-peer. What nowadays it's much more targeted, right? You're having kind of a private peer-to-peer group that you're exchanging data from. That said, to maintain control over that group and not just blast everybody with uncontrollable amounts of data, you do have to have some visibility into that. So controlling it and doing all that is basically a factor of the software. In general, once you cross above 20 users, outside of some very special selective software for networks like that, it's probably going to get unwieldy.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And before we close this out, are there any last thoughts you guys have? Anything you want to share to wrap this up?
I would say it's just about making it seamless, making you not think about this stuff. When Brian was a huge proponent of this in designing it, and I got really excited once I actually had a unit here at my house, copied data to it, and then went to lunch, and magically by the time I got back, like, everybody has it. And that's just a whole nother level of networking that, quite frankly, 6 months ago, I would have told you, like, yeah, it's not going to be that simple. It's not going to be that fast.
And for the video guys out there, the coolest part, frankly, is everybody has it in the same place. So all the pathing is the same. Everything's and realistically, there's a couple of caveats to this, but for the most part, you could walk into the office to the primary platform system, sit down, load up your project, and have it, and not have to worry about linking. Which is like, once you look at remote workflows, right now, remote workflows are all about change and compromise and doing it a little bit different. And this one's just dead simple stupid, and it's awesome.
I'll tell you what, just to add another element that really doesn't have to do with a peer-to-peer necessarily, but it's this implementation of a peer-to-peer. As I've worked with this, I've realized, oh, shoot, I have legitimate shared storage at my home. And what that meant is I was actually able to, for that project, because the client sent us a Premiere project file and a bunch of raw media, and I actually wanted to export it. And I just jumped on my other Mac laptop and opened it up. Premiere's installed on that. I was like, well, I guess I could render it on that. And I rendered that out. It took, 15, 20 minutes to render that timeline out. And I did that on a different computer because I realized I had shared storage at home. And, before I had this setup, I would have had to render that on my laptop, which means, well, I'm not doing that during work hours. I'm waiting until night. And it was a pretty cool little benefit.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So thanks, everyone, again, for joining us for another week of ProMAX Tech Talks. Stay tuned next week for another episode. And don't forget to hit that red button below and follow us on our social media channels. If you'd like to learn more, check out our website at promax.com and feel to reach out with any questions you have. And if there's anything you want to see on a future episode, leave a comment below or send us an email. We'll make sure we can get it covered in a future episode. Thanks, everyone, and have a great week.